Lancs, Bromley Cross, Bolton.
He'd cooked up a plan that was both simple and brilliant. Sean would identify lost masterpieces mentioned in rare books that only an expert would usually read. Then he'd recreate them so they could be discovered by the dealers and museums.
How are you finding objects that are now missing?
I just go through the books and read through, and what I see, I think I can make that.
When you see that it's missing or lost in history, is that when you decide to make it?
Sometimes, yeah. You just give it me, I'll do it.
It was here that Sean learnt of the Risley Park Lancs, a Roman silver plate that had turned up in just a few fragments back in the 18th century. Sean made a copy of the plate back home in Bolton. Then George took it to Peter Clayton, one of the country's top experts on Roman antiquities.
We first heard of Farmer George as we laughingly spoke of him because he looked like it, absolutely. And he wrote us a letter in February 1991 saying that he got a silver plate that someone had said to him. I've got a copy of the letter here, actually. And he says an antique dealer had suggested to him it might be this Risley Park Lancs. And of course, immediately we said, it can't be complete. We know about that in archaeology. It's only in 6 pieces. And he said, oh, he's got the complete thing. And he brought it down to us. When Farmer George brought it in, got a big suitcase with an appalling tartan rug in it, which he unwrapped, and we turned it over to look at the back. Because in the original published engraving here, in 1736, it tells you what the inscription was on the back, and it was there. Bullseye, you might say.
The Lancs hadn't been seen since 1736 and was legendary amongst Roman experts. Now that it had been found, mysteriously reassembled, it would prove irresistible to the dealers and museums.
According to George, it had been put together and it had come into his family. He remembered it as a child. His grandmother used to polish it. And he always said, and he was most adamant about this, his grandmother would never allow him to touch it, and so he didn't.
The metal was tested at the British Museum to see if it was Roman, and all but one of the fragments matched the right period. Believing that the greenhouse plate was an 18th century cast of the original, the museum's Roman expert wrote back to Peter Clayton.
Oh, this is the one. This is a letter which is on the headed paper from the British Museum, and if I may read to you, I do wish we could acquire the object. Although it is not the original in a technical sense, I have no doubt it constitutes a full record of the Lancs. Having seen and examined it, I am more convinced than ever that it is Romano-British in every sense, and the potential for future scholarship based on this piece is enormous.
In 1992, a donor bought the Lancs for £93,000 and gave it to the museum. Sean's plate then went on display as a replica next to an authentic Roman Lancs and was admired by millions of visitors. 3 years later, another of the greenhouse fakes ended up in the museum's Anglo-Saxon department. But this time, the metal was found to be modern, and alarm bells started ringing.
As soon as we discovered that the Lancs vendor was the same name, I thought I'd better check back through our records just to see if, and of course we do regularly get fakes brought in, not all of them made by the Greenhouse family, to see if we'd had any other things that seemed to be associated, and sure enough, there were one or two things which had come in 1989, a fake clasp with an inscription, Lulric may fake it, an Anglo-Saxon.
It turned out that the Greenhalghs had been bombarding the museum with fakes, targeting a variety of different departments.
My great-great-grandfather was the local land bailiff at Darwin, who'd supervised the excavation of the burial mounds, including this magnificent pseudo-Anglo-Saxon helmet. I never saw the real thing, but he sent in the photos. And this object, which came in, says, Athelstan brings greetings to Bishop Frithstan. Then this extraordinary gold spear or...
After amassing evidence of at least a dozen forgeries, in 1995 the museum contacted the police.
I received a call from the director of the British Museum requesting that I go and see him in his office, which I duly did. He went on then to describe some other objects which had been going into different departments through different routes. But ultimately, when they looked at them, they all seemed to have the same origin. And he said, and they come from a family in Bolton. And I just said, do you mean the Greenhalghs? And he looked in amazement and said, how did you know? Clearly, this was going to be a case where the next step that was needed was the knock on the door. The file went to the operations unit. And to my knowledge, twice the officer to whom it went was, on the verge of going up and making an arrest, and twice was taken off and put onto, if you like, more pressing investigations. And when I retired from the police in 1999, the file was still pending. It was still there waiting for an officer to go and make those arrests.
Having evaded capture for a second time, Sean now progressed to faking modern artists, as well as making more bogus antiquities. For every new piece that Sean made, George had to invent a new relative who'd given it to the family.
When Colonel Hardcastle died, his housekeeper, she gave them to my mother.
It seems a lot of coincidences here that either this painting from Peploe has been passed down through generations.
All the way through the police interviews, George stuck to his stories.
I'm related to a famous Irish poet, and he gave it my grandma.
By the end of the 90s, Sean's fakes had got so good that one of them ended up touring the world, hailed as a work of genius.
This is the first ceramic that Gauguin ever made. It shows a faun. And rather interestingly, it's the first time he uses the monogram PGO, which he later used on a lot of his paintings, and you can just see it there at the bottom of the faun. Now, PGO in French, Pego, was apparently a word which he'd also picked up on his travels earlier as a sailor. It was a kind of British nautical slang for a penis. A pego was apparently what sailors used to call each other when they had arguments on board ship. So in choosing this monogram, pego, he was very deliberately harking back to his own sexual problems.
Gauguin's faun hadn't been seen since it disappeared in the 1920s. Sean recreated it 70 years later from a book he'd found in the library.
My own opinion is that that the faun was inspired directly by a book that had come out about Gauguin sculptures in the early 60s, I think it was, by